So first off, I'd like to thank Tom Hilditch for organizing this convention. I think it's been a really valuable opportunity to hear a wide range of perceptions on the Endangered Species Act. So I thought I'd put that quote out there. It was on a Middlesex Federation of Agriculture billboard a couple of years ago. I think just to give you a brief overview, I'm going to talk a bit about agriculture in Ontario, try and give you a perspective for the industry, talk a bit about barn owls and barn swallows and some of the concerns and issues that farmers have with that. Talk a bit about offsets and some communication issues, and on that one I'll highlight it or tie it back to Jefferson salamander, and then that would be it. So while Ontario is a vast province, 1.07 million square kilometers, only about 5% of the province is suitable for or is capable of supporting agriculture. It's about 5 million hectares, or as we usually refer to it, as about 13 million acres of land. In the last census, there were about 51,000 or just under 52,000 farms in the province. About 95% of those are family owned. They have about 10 billion in farm gate sales, and I think at the last count there were somewhere on the high side of 220 different commodities produced in the province of Ontario. Probably the most diverse agricultural economy in North America. We may be somewhere close to California, sort of in the scope of commodities produced in the province. So here's some information or some perspective from the 2011 census and comparing a bit of it back to the 2006. So the number of farms have declined by about 5,200. The farmed area has declined by 630 some odd thousand acres, probably attributed to urban growth, infrastructure requirements, and land abandonment. So in 06, we had about 13 million or 13.3 million acres under production. In 2011, it dropped to 12.6 million. At the same time, provincial, national, and global populations are rising. We heard that yesterday. More people equals more food required, and Ontario is a global exporter of food. But we have less acreage to produce it on. So we'll just switch for a minute and talk about who OFA is. We're Canada's largest general farm organization, which means we are charged with, by our members with addressing issues that interest or affect all farmers. The commodity organizations, dairy farmers, cattlemen's association, grain farmers, and so on and so forth, are responsible for the promotion and marketing of their own commodity. OFA has about 36,000 family farm members out of that 52,000 farms in the province. And we also have about 26 commodity organizations that are members of the organization as well. So farmers recognize the need to protect and recover endangered species. We've been supportive of the principle behind that for a long time, except farmers feel squeezed between the expectations to produce more food and societal expectations for wildlife habitat, vistas and views, recreational opportunities on their acreage, because the majority of that 12.5 million acres of land that is under production in Ontario is in southern Ontario, where the majority of the people are also living. So there's that juxtaposition between producing food and so on the farm and the other associated expectations that society has. Species, have been pushed out of the urban areas as urban expansion continues. The habitat is lost, and those predominantly plants and animals and birds and so on get pushed back, and it gets pushed more onto the agricultural land. Farms do provide compatible habitat, and I think one of the expectations, one of the things we hear all the time is from our members is that, well, the critters and the plants and so on are there. It's obviously they're comfortable with what we're doing on the farm, or else they wouldn't still be there. Don't want to get too controversial, but I would take a bit of exception or contrast to Ron's comment this morning about quiet confidence in relation to bobolink. I think it's more of an issue, from what I hear, of of concern, or quiet concern, shall we say. And I think the lack of certainty that producers have about what's going to happen after 2014 is behind that, and I think that's led to some unnecessary habitat loss because they're taking action now rather than wait and see what happens. So I was going to talk a bit about barn swallows and barn owls. And so there's a picture of an old bank barn. That one's a little unusual because it's got the overhang there, but the intent was that the livestock stayed in the bottom, or were housed in the bottom, and grains and straw and hay and so on was stored upstairs. And for whatever reason, probably because it was a nice warm environment, barn owls and barn swallows adapted to it. Barn owls are endangered, you all know that. They have a regulated habitat under the regulations. And what's protected is the nesting site in the barn. It's been previously used for the last 12 months, includes the barn, and about an area within a kilometer outside is a feeding area. Barn swallow is a more recent one, assessed in 2011, threatened, has general habitat protection, so we don't have that kind of specific detail with swallows as with barn owls. Recovery strategy is being developed, but I guess the question we get is, what's exactly being protected? So here's some more specific kinds of questions. Is it the nest in the barn and the immediate area around it, some 5, 10, whatever meters you want to pick? Is it the entire barn itself? Is it the barn plus the foraging area outside? And how does protection impact the use of the barn? In some cases, remember, it's still being actively used to store commodities and to house animals. And how does this impact the day-to-day operations on the farm? Just some other thoughts. Does storing crops, baled hay and straw in the barn, negatively impact barn swallows? Or does the storage of equipment, sometimes the farmer will park his combine in there when it's not in use. And the thought or concern there is, does the piles of baled straw and hay provide access to those nests up on the barn beams for cats and raccoons and dear knows what else? So, how do we deal with that, or what's the expectation around dealing with that? And equally, must the doors be left open to provide access and egress to the barn? Agriculture in Ontario is changing. Farmers are becoming more specialized. Fewer numbers are keeping livestock, but those that are keeping it in bigger numbers. And so bank barns are becoming unused. They're not really adapted and set up to house the larger numbers of animals that some producers are having. So we're seeing them being abandoned or declined. Many are in the state of decline. And I guess the question I'll leave you with there on that one is, how do we reconcile this reality that agriculture is changing and that form of structure for housing livestock isn't widely used anymore? We'll go back. How do we go back? There. So just a couple of comments about offsets. And I think one of the concerns that we're starting to think about offsets is that not in the sense that creating offsets is a bad idea, and I don't want you to get that perception, but the concern that we're having is that if an offset is being required as some sort of condition of a development application, and whatever sort of development that is, we won't get into that. But the perception that we have, or the strong sense we have, is that at the very least it's a double loss, and in some cases if the offset is more than 1-to-1, in the order of 1-to-3 or so, that it's a more expansive loss because we've lost agricultural land to the original non-farm use, that's the urban development of some description at all, and now there's a request for an offset, and now we need to take more agricultural land to provide that offset. So there's the concern is that we're requiring more and more of the agricultural land base, and it's an ever-decreasing commodity or entity. The other comment I'm going to make is in relation to some thoughts on Jefferson salamander, and that goes to the point about communication. And I know we think we all communicate in the same language, but we have jargon and so on that tends to get unique to our business, our industry, whatever. And sometimes the words we're using to communicate ideas and thoughts don't translate to the people who are hearing them because they hear them differently than we say them. So I want you to picture a southwestern Ontario farm, about 200 acres in size. There's a small wood lot of 5 to 10 acres in the back corner, and right adjacent to that wood lot is an irrigation pond. And Dad dug that about 50 years ago, so it's been there a long time. Not my dad, but the fellow whose farm it was, his dad had dug it. And so the woodlot is perceived to have Jefferson salamander in it, and the farmer gets a letter that says, I should go back and say the irrigation pond's used to irrigate the crops predominantly late in the summer in a particularly dry year. It's a conventional farm, shall we say. They use pesticides and herbicides. And so he gets a letter talking about threats to Jefferson salamander. And they express the concern. Threats to Jefferson salamander were listed as drawdown of the water in the ponds. That's the ponds in the woodlot, but not the irrigation pond. Canopy removal in the woodlot, and herbicide use. And that's all the information he got. So what does that mean? And farmers being farmers aren't likely to call M&R and ask for clarification about what that meant. They'll discuss it a lot at the coffee shop. After some conversations and investigation on my part, it came out that the irrigation pond was used late in the summer. What they were concerned about was drawdown in the vernal ponds in the woodlot, which by the time the irrigation pond would be in use, the salamanders would not be using it anymore, so that wasn't an issue anymore. Canopy removal was clear cutting, so the odd tree removal in the wintertime for firewood or saw logs or something like that really wasn't the issue at all. And herbicide use was in the woodlot, not in the adjacent cropland. So I think it goes to the message that we need to be very careful and that when we're communicating ideas and thoughts that we're using language that everybody's understanding. We may even need to test some of these messages to make sure that what we're saying is what we're hearing. And I'll leave you with this thought. Paul Missley was vice president at OFA, passed away in 2008. Paul and I worked a lot on the the lead up to the Endangered Species Act, a lot of consultations, and I heard him say that numerous times at meetings with a variety of people on it. So I'll just leave that thought with you. I think we need to figure out how to make the presence of endangered species on private land, farms in this case, an asset, and then we don't need to worry about them near as much as if they're not viewed as an asset. Thank you.